So my name's Walker Dupuy. I'm a second year Integrative Conservation and Anthropology student. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about how I spent my last 7 months with my talk entitled Lessons for Integrative Conservation from a Participatory CIFOR project. So for this talk, I'm going to start by introducing my ICON internship a little bit. I'm going to then talk a little bit about that experience over there, and then end by asking some questions and offering some ideas for how that internship could maybe inform ICON, and then how ICON could hopefully inform that internship. So in late April 2013, I was offered an internship with the Center for International Forestry Research, or CIFOR. And CIFOR's mission is multifaceted and ambitious, specifically to advance human well-being, environmental conservation, and equity by conducting research to help shape policies and practices that affect forests in developing countries. And for that mission alone, it seemed like a good place to explore integrative ideas. And so in late May, I wound up getting to go to Indonesia, which was beautiful. But for 5 of those 7 months, I was based in CIFOR's headquarters in Bogor, a city in West Java, specifically working as a social scientist on a research project focused on PMRV, or Participatory Measurement, Reporting, and Verification. Now, measurement, reporting, and verification are seen as essential for effective multiscalar resource management. And where our team came into play was to look at how those ideas might help the country of Indonesia develop a national REDD+ program. For those who don't know, REDD stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, which is a UN program focused on carbon sequestration through developing countries sustainably managing and conserving their forests. But for such a program to work, you have to know how much carbon your country has, which involves measuring it. You have to be able to then get those measurements through various bureaucracies from the local to national level. And you have to be able to verify that the measurements that you've done are correct. All of that's shortened to MRV. Where participatory comes in is that increasingly it's recognized that for both economic and equity reasons, including local communities in that measurement and reporting, is seen as an important and necessary thing to do. Different places in a country, however, have different constraints and possibilities for PMRV, depending on socio-ecological context. And so it's for that reason that this project decided to focus on 3 very different places. In particular, Central Java Province, down here on the bottom, West Kalimantan, just above it, and Papua off to the right. Central Java is densely populated and largely agroforested. West Kalimantan is more sparsely populated with growing deforestation and multiple livelihoods, legal and illegal. And Papua province is more sparsely populated still largely forested, but with deforestation threats growing. In addition to being multi-sited, this research was also multiscalar and multidisciplinary, with 3 different sub-teams comprised of 20 people in total, looking at PMRV in 3 very different ways. So we had a governance team investigating data flows in the health and forestry sectors from local to national scales. We had a GIS team looking at land cover change and testing different verification methods. And finally, we had a social team that I was a part of looking at community enabling conditions for PMRV in these 3 different sites, specifically enabling conditions like their local capacity and availability to participate, their willingness to participate, and finally, potential organizational and structural support in these communities that may be able to advance the idea of PMRV. To do this, however, we needed to develop methods. And so the social team sat in conference rooms for long days and long weeks, probably around a month and a half for 2 different field seasons, so 3 months in total. And what I noticed about this, after we designed household surveys and focus group discussions, key informant interviews, and participatory mapping, focused on everything from demographics and livelihoods to forest management, land tenure, seasonal availability, and drivers of forest change was that there were multiple challenges and problems involved in such work. Problems such as research foci and definitions, as people were coming from different disciplines and had different ideas and priorities for where that research should be. Problems of communication, as there were multiple languages from an international team, where I was the only native English speaker, aside from one other who came along a few months later. The mixture of Bahasa, French, and English meant that mistranslation or miscommunication was easily possible, and meaning could easily be lost in conversation. There were also problems of translation, in that we needed instruments in 2 different languages. And that meant that not only the threat of mistranslation, but simply lost meaning between those documents was a reality that was always present. And I guess I feel that ICON is especially posed to recognize those challenges and to think about those challenges, and especially ready to interrogate those problems. After working through those challenges, we actually got to the field, which was obviously the most exciting part of this internship. And for me, that was in the easternmost province of Indonesia, which is Papua. Specifically, we spent 2 months there in the fall of 2013, going to the Regency and river system of the Mambramo Raya. The Mambramo is a heavily forested area, as this picture outside a very small plain shows. Communities live in the highlands as well as along the lowlands on the river. Others live further downstream in the mangrove, and still others on the beach as the river breaks out into the Pacific Ocean. As the landscape implies, these people are heavily forest dependent, whether with fishing and hunting, gardening and gathering. And it was in 3 such communities, on the river, on the mangrove, and on the beach, that we were able to conduct surveys and interviews on village history, conduct focus group discussions on forest management and seasonal activities, and do participatory mapping exercises on both current and past land use and land change. And it was through all those things, and I'm still currently working through these experiences and what all this means for both this project and myself. But as I sat there and I watched these things, the importance of strategic communication came through time and time again, both in terms of providing context, in terms of building trust, in terms of promoting transparency, and in terms of enabling reflexivity, the ability to promote self-awareness and reflection on the things that we were doing. And in particular, I saw 3 different kinds of communication be advanced through this research. The first being multi-scalar, communication happening at different levels, on the government, community, and research team level. Adaptive communication that was flexible and responsive to community needs. And finally, public communication. And so in terms of multi-scalar communication, this happened on a number of levels. We spoke to government officials on the national level, the regional level, the district level, sub-district level, and local level. Through the presentation of posters, of DVDs, of related relevant reports, we were able to assuage fears, build trust, and give context for the work that not only CIFOR does, but our project does. Such communication also happened at the community level, where throughout fieldwork we held community meetings to take questions, to provide context, and to make sure that there was transparency of purpose in the work that we were doing. Again, we provided relevant reports and DVDs to school teachers and local leaders, as well as designed posters that were specifically developed for community use, which is shown here and in the slide previous. But perhaps, this is the last form of multi-scalar communication, but perhaps the most interesting form was the kind that I saw within the research team itself. Through nightly meetings, as well as strategic ones during the day, We were able to discuss not only problems and challenges, but progress and planning. And a daily field report that I kept and then discussed with project leaders allowed us to reflect on where we had been, where we were going, and the various evidence and data that we had been seeing come up as these exercises progressed. The second form of communication I noticed was adaptive communication. And the example that stood out for me was when the communities of Yoke and Montabore in the mangrove and on the beach, before we were allowed to start any research, demanded that they be better informed about the work that we were doing, the definition of carbon and its importance, not only for us, but for them. And so with that, our research team lead, who's in the green there, his name's Guillaume, decided to hold a multi-community class just a few days later, in which we presented information, took questions, and had a conversation about environmental science, about carbon, and about climate change. And a little over 24 people, men, women, children, youth, and elders attended, and it was received both positively but also probingly, and showed, I feel, a good example of critical engagement by communities with research. And lastly, I'd say public communication is another example of strategic communication that we saw with this work. This is an example of a website from CIFOR, but our own PMRV team is attempting to make one similar to it. The hope being that such things will be able to engage the public, but also provide transparency on our goals, our methods, and our hopes. I would say that lessons for ICON not only stem from things like strategic communication, but equally from challenges that we saw in the field. The most evident and fraught being the challenge of mixed-matched expectations. The lack of tangible benefits from the research that we were doing ran head-on into a recognition of the community desire for aid and development. And the fact that they and previous experience with projects and such activities either had an expectation of such engagements as a vehicle for money or a vehicle for trouble. The lack of tangible benefits was also a huge area of discomfort for our entire team. And I feel that it's exactly this gap between tangible benefits and intangible research, between research and practice costs and benefits, that ICON can and should be especially attuned to and focused on. And so I'm going to end by simply summarizing how I feel PMRV can help inform integrative conservation, and then lastly, how integrative conservation can hopefully help inform the next stages of PMRV. And so as I've mentioned previously, this project was designed to be multidisciplinary and multi-methods. It was focused both across sites and across scales, with attention to stakeholders on multiple levels. It also emphasized strategic communication, both multi-scalar, adaptive, and public, and especially with an emphasis on trust, transparency, context, and reflexivity. Multiple challenges were also noticed in research design and practice that I feel ICON is especially adept and able to think about and work on. Definitions and challenges like communication and translation problems, as well as community versus researcher expectations. But perhaps the final challenge that we're facing as this talk winds down is that the PMRV team is now in its second phase. We've designed methods, we've collected data, but now we're moving on to analysis, or at least they are, as I'm now back here. But there's a question of how do we do that? How do we make all these things talk to each other and make all these things connect? How do we bring these sites together and these methods together, these teams together? How do we create an integrative kind of analysis where perhaps we have a lot of data and we have thoughts on what to do with it, but there could easily be things that we're missing as well. We specifically did not include ecological data collection in this phase of the project, hoping that the next phases would be able to move into a more active component of tree measurement with local communities. Is there a way that socio-ecological systems theory could help inform that phase that perhaps we aren't thinking about right now? The idea of participation and participatory MRV brings up questions all its own. Are there ways that communities and their participation can be involved in design as well as enactment of PMRV? Can local knowledge be involved in those in ways that they are not currently? And lastly, is there perhaps a broader definition of trade-offs that we can envision for PMRV, and a way that ICON could maybe help us think through that? But the exciting part of all this is that integrative conservation is new, and so I'm really excited to hear through y'all's thoughts on maybe how this program, you all, and everyone here can help us move forward with things. So with that, I want to thank everybody and every place that I've been that allowed me to do this. And if there's time, I can take questions.